Usually when we talk about energy, there's this underlying expectation of invisibility.
Oh, absolutely.
Right, like it operates a lot like the plumbing in your house. You flip a switch on the wall, the lights come on.
Yeah, you turn the key, the engine starts.
Exactly. The massive, sprawling, like highly complex mechanism behind all of it is, well, it's completely out of sight. And honestly, we prefer it that way.
We definitely prefer it that way. I mean, we like our infrastructure to just work, right? Just operating quietly in the background.
Right.
It provides this baseline of comfort, knowing we never have to actively think about, the supply chains or the voltage regulation or the thousands of miles of pipeline keeping our daily routines intact.
But then you step into the stark reality of today, Thursday, March 26, 2026, and suddenly that invisible machinery is, well, it's breaking down right in front of us.
Yeah, in a very public way.
Because oil has just violently crossed the $100 per barrel mark, and we are looking at a global landscape that is terrifyingly volatile. The gears of global commerce are visibly grinding to a halt.
It is the definition of a systemic shock. What we're watching unfold right now isn't just, a market fluctuation.
Right.
It's a structural fracture in how the modern world actually powers itself.
Which brings us to the mission for today's deep dive.
Yeah.
We are looking at a chilling new phrase dominating global headlines right now.
Yeah, it's everywhere.
To fully understand it, we are unpacking excerpts from a deeply urgent new report. It's titled, "The Energy Lockdown, Global Security, and the Iran War."
A really crucial piece of text.
Yeah, and our goal today is to decode what this escalating geopolitical situation actually means for global supply chains, government policy, and, most importantly, for you,
Exactly.
the person listening to this right now. We need to look at how this will actually reshape your daily life.
And it is a critical text to examine because it provides a mechanical framework for the chaos playing out on the evening news. It strips away the panic and looks at the underlying physics and economics of the crisis. But before we get into those mechanics, we probably need to set some ground rules for our analysis.
Oh, absolutely. A quick but crucial note before we jump in. This source material touches on incredibly politically charged topics.
Very much so.
We're talking about the 2026 Iran war, government mandates, emergency rationing, and severe climate policy rollbacks. So we want to be crystal clear with you. We are not here to take any political sides.
Not at all.
We aren't endorsing the viewpoints, the military actions, or the environmental policies described in the text. We are simply acting as your guides, impartially reporting on and analyzing the framework provided in this source material.
Right, so you can understand the ideas shaping our world today. Our job is just to break down the underlying logic and the causality of the text.
Exactly.
We are looking strictly at the mechanics of a global crisis, tracing the cause and effect without weighing in on the politics.
Okay, let's unpack this. The core concept here, the actual title of the report, is this idea of an energy lockdown.
Right.
Before we can understand how this affects our morning commute or our grocery bills, we have to define the term. And, look at the geopolitical match that lit the fire.
Well, the term is rapidly gaining traction because it perfectly describes a severe energy supply crunch that forces restricted usage across the board.
So not just a shortage, but actual forced restrictions.
Exactly. We were talking about governments, heavy industries, and everyday consumers facing strict, mathematically enforced limits on how much power and fuel they can consume.
Yeah.
And the catalyst for this, according to the report, is the current conflict, the 2026 Iran war, and specifically the disruption of the Strait of Hormuz.
That is the geographic ground zero. The text highlights a vital statistic that is, honestly, it's almost hard to comprehend.
It's massive.
The Strait of Hormuz handles roughly 20% of global oil and liquefied natural gas, or LNG, flows.
Yeah.
1/5 of the world's crucial energy supply passes through that single narrow waterway between the Persian Gulf and the Gulf of Oman.
And that waterway is incredibly vulnerable. The text notes that energy infrastructure in the Middle East is sustaining severe damage right now.
Right.
And shipping routes are facing total shutdowns. But the disruption isn't just about the physical destruction of pipelines.
What else is it then?
It's about the logistics of maritime shipping. When a waterway like Hormuz becomes an active conflict zone, insurance companies essentially pull coverage.
Oh, of course.
The premiums for a very large crude carrier, a VLCC, to transit that strait skyrocket overnight to levels that make the voyage financially impossible.
So the shipping companies simply refuse to send their vessels in.
Exactly.
I mean, the physical oil might still be in the ground or even in the storage tanks at the port, but the ships aren't coming to pick it up.
They cannot risk a multi-million-dollar vessel and its crew. So 20% of the global supply is suddenly bottlenecked.
Just off the board.
Yep. And in a highly optimized global market, taking 20% of the supply off the board doesn't just create a regional shortage. It creates an immediate, violent global shock.
And nations frantically scramble to secure alternative fuel options, right?
They try, but you cannot physically replace that volume of oil and gas overnight.
Right.
You can't reroute thousands of LNG carriers around the Cape of Good Hope without adding weeks to the transit time, which in turn burns millions of additional gallons of fuel just to deliver fuel.
It's a compounding problem. So is this like the 1970s gas lines, or is it more like the COVID-19 pandemic, but instead of a biological virus keeping us at home, the contagion is a sheer lack of fuel?
Well, the source material explicitly states this situation mirrors pandemic-era lockdown dynamics.
Really?
Yeah, but instead of public health mandates driving the closures and the isolation, it is the physical disruption of energy.
Okay, that makes sense.
It is a combination of brutal market forces, pricing people out of movement, followed by government policies forcing them to stay put because the grid simply cannot sustain normal activity.
Wait, so you're saying it's not a sudden flip of a switch where the lights go out, like a hacker hits the mainframe and the entire grid goes dark in a split second?
Not at all.
It's more like a slow strangulation of the economy. How does that actually materialize? What is the physical mechanism that takes us from a blockade in the Middle East to a factory shutting down in Europe or North America?
It unfolds systematically.
Mm.
The first domino is the supply shock we just discussed. The war, the shipping bottleneck, the physical inability to move the molecules of energy.
Right, the logistics failure.
Exactly. And that triggers the second domino, a massive sudden spike in fuel costs.
Mm.
Oil crossing $100 a barrel is the blaring alarm for that second domino falling.
What's fascinating here is how the text frames that price spike. It doesn't just call it inflation.
No, it uses a very specific term.
Right, it describes it as acting like a literal tax on economies.
It functions exactly like a tax. But instead of the revenue going to a treasury to build roads or fund schools, the capital is just incinerated by the sheer cost of friction in the supply chain.
Wow, incinerated.
Yeah. If diesel doubles in price, maritime freight doubles, and trucking doubles.
So it's basically a supply chain margin call. It bleeds the consumer's wallet dry before they even have a chance to spend their discretionary income.
Exactly.
You pay more for the bread and milk, and you pay twice as much just to drive your car to the store to buy it. Your budget for going out to dinner, buying shoes, or taking a vacation is wiped out by the basic cost of existing.
And it cascades, right. When that invisible tax slashes consumer spending globally, business activity organically grinds to a halt.
People just stay home.
Exactly. Restaurants close, retail shops scale back, travel plummets. The economy begins to lock itself down through sheer market pressure.
So the businesses are doing it to themselves to survive.
Yeah. Companies simply cannot afford the energy overhead to keep their doors open when foot traffic vanishes. This happens before a single government official steps up to a podium to announce a mandate.
The market enforces the lockdown first.
Precisely.
But the text makes it clear that governments do step in as the shortage deepens. It's not just left up to the free market.
They have to. And that's when we hit the third domino, state intervention. The text outlines a progression of triage policies.
Triage like in a hospital.
Exactly like that. It starts softly, limiting fuel purchases for everyday citizens, maybe, odd even license plate rationing at the gas pumps.
Right.
Then, leaders move from encouraging remote work to legally mandating it, echoing the pandemic playbook to keep commuters off the road and save municipal fuel.
And it extends deep into the industrial sector, too, so it's forced grid triage. Governments are looking at the load balancing and actively pulling the plug on commercial sectors to keep the voltage up for defense and healthcare.
Yes. Grid operators are literally throttling wattage to non-essential industrial zones via smart grid infrastructure.
They're just flipping the switch remotely.
Pretty much. They aren't relying on companies to voluntarily power down. They are managing the physical limitations of the grid. Think about it. An aluminum smelter or a massive fertilizer plant draws an astronomical amount of electricity. If the grid frequency starts to drop, Because natural gas deliveries for the power plants have stalled, the operators have to shed load instantly.
Otherwise, the whole grid collapses.
Exactly. So they cut power to the heavy industry to ensure the hospitals, the military bases, and the water treatment facilities stay online.
So, what does this all mean for someone listening to this right now who is just trying to commute to work or buy groceries? We're talking about a reality where your physical mobility is severely restricted, right?
Absolutely.
And your employment could be paused indefinitely if your company is deemed non-essential by a grid operator.
The macroeconomic hits detailed in the report are staggering. We're looking at high risks of global recession, systemic supply chain breakdowns, and skyrocketing inflation driven entirely by transport costs.
Just massive systemic failure.
Yeah, and the International Energy Agency, the IEA, has officially flagged this as a major challenge to global energy security. And when the IEA waves a red flag, it means the math is no longer working.
Let's dig into that inflation mechanic for a second, because it's not just about expensive gasoline.
No, it hits everything.
Right. Like, if natural gas supplies are constrained, the cost of fertilizer explodes because natural gas is the primary feedstock for ammonia-based fertilizers.
Exactly.
That means agricultural yields drop and the cost of food at the grocery store skyrockets. The energy lockdown bleeds directly into the food supply.
It impacts every single category of your budget. And the text emphasizes that the precursors are already here.
We're already seeing it.
Yeah, we aren't theorizing about a distant future. We are watching the volatile fuel prices today. We are seeing early industrial slowdowns where European factories are temporarily halting production because the energy overhead exceeds their profit margins.
And perhaps the most chilling detail in all of this, governments are quietly preparing those emergency rationing plans right now. They are drawing up the blueprints for the lockdown behind closed doors, deciding which industries will be sacrificed first if Hormuz remains closed.
What we are seeing today is merely the opening act. If the geopolitical situation doesn't stabilize, those blueprints become active law.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Facing economic collapse, massive inflation, and a public that literally cannot afford to move, how do global leaders react?
They panic and then they pivot.
Right. The text outlines a fundamental rewiring of long-term global playbooks, a massive paradigm shift.
That was a huge shift.
Because for the last decade, the entire global conversation was entirely about transitioning away from fossil fuels to save the planet. Almost overnight, according to this report, countries are rolling back those green regulations and aggressively pumping oil just to keep the lights on and defend their borders.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, it is a profound pivot. Before the 2026 conflict, energy policy was almost exclusively driven by climate goals, carbon reduction, and net zero targets. Now, the absolute overriding priority is national security and grid reliability.
It's pure survival mode. When your economy is suffocating from an energy lockdown, environmental concerns from a decade ago are immediately pushed to the back burner.
Exactly. The text details the drastic policy reversals unfolding. Nations are cracking open their strategic petroleum reserves, the SPRs.
But SPR is a buffer, right?
Yeah, it's designed to smooth over short-term disruptions, not replace 20% of global flows indefinitely.
It's a Band-Aid.
So, to fix the underlying deficit, governments are scaling back environmental regulations that hinder rapid energy extraction. They are fast-tracking drilling permits and aggressively accelerating domestic fossil fuel production.
They are doing whatever it takes to break the invisible tax of friction and get the supply chain moving again.
Whatever it takes.
But the text doesn't say green energy is completely dead, does it? Like, renewables are still in the mix, but the rationale for building them is completely changed.
They are being entirely reframed. The justification for building a massive solar farm or a wind turbine has shifted away from carbon reduction.
Interesting.
Yeah, renewables, alongside a massive resurgence of interest in nuclear power, are regaining attention strictly for domestic stability and energy independence.
Let's talk about nuclear for a second, because the text brings up the concept of baseload power, which is critical here.
Oh, it's the most important part of the grid. Baseload power is the minimum continuous level of demand on an electrical grid over a 24-hour period.
It's what keeps the heartbeat going.
Exactly. Wind and solar are intermittent. They only produce when the wind blows or the sun shines. But a modern economy requires uninterruptible, heavy-duty power to keep the grid frequency stable.
And historically, coal and natural gas provided that baseload.
Right. But if your natural gas is stuck on a ship outside a conflict zone, your baseload is at risk.
I see.
Which is why nuclear is suddenly the darling of national defense strategy. A nuclear reactor provides massive, continuous baseload power without relying on a vulnerable global supply chain of foreign oil or gas.
That makes perfect sense. A domestic solar panel array doesn't rely on a shipment of LNG passing safely through the Strait of Hormuz.
Nope. No.
And a nuclear plant can run for years on domestic uranium. Green energy and nuclear are now viewed strictly through the lens of national defense.
Exactly. It is not about saving the environment anymore. It is about immunizing the domestic grid from foreign wars.
That is a staggering philosophical whiplash. Energy is no longer treated as just another commodity traded on the open market. It has become a matter of literal national survival.
The text summarizes the ultimate thesis perfectly. Energy now dictates freedom, the economy, and geopolitics for all.
Period.
Period. When a nation controls its own energy, it controls its ability to function, to produce, and to project power. Without it, you are entirely at the mercy of market friction and global conflict.
You are forced into a lockdown.
You're forced into a lockdown.
It recontextualizes every single headline we are reading right now. To pull all of these complex threads together as we wrap up today's deep dive, we started by looking at the physical geography of the Strait of Hormuz, recognizing how a localized conflict disrupts 20% of the world's oil and LNG. And we saw how the sheer logistics of rerouting those ships triggers an energy lockdown.
Yeah, and then we trace the mechanics of that lockdown. From the initial supply shock to the devastating friction costs of skyrocketing fuel prices that naturally slow the velocity of money.
Right.
Right down to governments intervening. We looked at grid operators throttling wattage, shedding industrial load, and mandating remote work to protect critical infrastructure.
We analyzed the real-world fallout for you, the listener, the cascading inflation hitting agricultural yields, the reduced physical mobility, and the immediate job risks in energy-intensive sectors. And finally, we unpacked the great pivot, the realization that global leaders are suddenly prioritizing raw national security, domestic baseload power, and energy independence over the climate goals that dominated the last 10 years.
It serves as a stark reminder that an energy lockdown isn't just a dramatic buzzword cooked up by politicians.
No, not at all.
It is a very real, mathematically enforced framework. If this crisis deepens, the limitations of the physical grid will dictate how you work, how you travel, and how you spend your money in the coming years.
It changes the rules of the board entirely. And that leaves us with a final thought, something for you to mull over as you go about your day.
Yeah, this is important.
We've talked extensively about how governments might normalize mandated remote work, grid throttling, and severely restricted travel to conserve national energy supplies during the specific war.
Right.
But historically, emergency powers and new infrastructures of control have a very funny habit of sticking around long after the initial crisis has passed.
They absolutely do. And this raises an incredibly important question. If the physical infrastructure and the legal framework for an energy lockdown are fully built and implemented today, do they ever truly get dismantled?
That's the billion-dollar question. If governments successfully train the public to accept restricted movement and smart grid energy throttling for the sake of national security, will we see the rise of permanent personal energy allowances in the future?
It's a scary thought.
Could we be looking at a world a decade from now where digital energy tracking apps tied directly to your citizenship dictate how many miles you are allowed to drive or how much electricity your household can consume in a given month long after the Iran war ends?
It is a sobering prospect.
Yeah.
But based on the mechanical framework we've decoded today, the tools required for that level of granular systemic control are being forged right now out of pure necessity.
It makes you look at that light switch on your wall a little differently, doesn't it?
It really does.
That invisible plumbing of the world suddenly feels very visible, very fragile, and deeply connected to your personal freedom.
It completely changes your relationship with the infrastructure around you.
Well, we want to thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Navigating this kind of dense geopolitical and economic material isn't always easy, but understanding the mechanics behind the curtain is the only way to truly prepare for what comes next.
Absolutely.
Keep staying curious, keep looking behind the headlines, and keep questioning the systems we take for granted. We'll catch you on the next deep dive.